As you've just heard, my name's Stephen Hunter. I'm a Director of Engineering at Forescat Technologies. If you haven't heard of Forescat, we are one of the world's top 8 leading cybersecurity startups, but we've been around for about 16 years. I'm here to ask you a question, actually. So as you see from the pan signage, it says, "Come here, get answers to your toughest cybersecurity questions." I'm going to ask you a very simple question that I bet you don't know the answer to. The core of my topic here is talking about IoT security, and most specifically, visibility as the core capability that you need to be able to answer the question that I'm about to ask you. So about a year or two ago, the market was making some predictions about IoT security. And I have them up here, a couple of key ones. December, so 2 years ago, December 2014, IDC predicted that 90% of organizations would have an IoT-related security breach within 2 years, which would be December 2016. Gartner mentioned, just June of this year, that more than a quarter of identified enterprise attacks will involve some element of IoT, even though only a small percent of the security budget will be on IoT projects. And then perhaps most interestingly, Symantec at the start of September, so 3 months ago, predicted or said that IoT devices will be increasingly used to carry out distributed denial of service attacks. Now those were the predictions that we made 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 3 months ago. What an interesting few months it has been. So IoT has everybody's attention right now. We have been in the IoT visibility game for about 10 years, and I'll explain why in a minute, but the last 3 months have been unprecedented in the history of the internet. So on the 20th of September, we saw a world record for the world's largest sustained DDoS attack at 620 gigabit per second against Krebs on Security, a United States security blogger. What was interesting about this was that up until September, the largest sustained attack was about 330 gig, but it was through DNS amplification. This was a 620 gig attack made up of a network of compromised IP video surveillance cameras, about 150,000. And then only 3 days later, that world record was broken again, when we had a 1 terabit per second sustained attack against a European hoster called OVH. Well, so what? Okay, so a blogger got taken down and was actually on Akamai, and Akamai DDoS couldn't handle the load, so they moved him off to Google. And then a European estate got taken down in September. That didn't affect us. Well, 1 month later, Dyn got taken down. Yet again, a world record, 225,000 compromised IoT devices with a sustained 1.5 terabit per second attack. Took down Dyn, and if you don't know Dyn provides the dynamic DNS services for many of the largest properties on the internet. Amazon, PayPal, Visa, Netflix, which my daughter was very upset about, and Twitter. So this has become a boardroom issue, and in my experience talking to executives and IT leaders around the region, it's a boardroom level issue right now. So as IT folk, and as integrators, I think this is something you need to think about. So here is the problem. For the last 25 years, it's taken us 25 years to get to about 10 billion devices. And this is a pretty common stats that you'll see out there. And the reason for that is that IT provides business value. And where there's business value, there's growth. Now, for most of my working career, and probably for most of yours, the dominant operating system in the enterprise was Microsoft Windows. In 2007, Apple came out with the iPhone, and we had the smartphone boom. So then it was Apple iOS and Android, most commonly with Samsung. And then on the back of iOS came the Apple ecosystem. And so now the 5, 6 operating systems, Windows, iOS, Android, Mac OS X, and perhaps Linux in your organization. And that's what we had to deal with. What's happening right now and moving forward, though, Well, there's two things. First of which, there's many more devices. But that doesn't worry me so much as the number of operating systems that we have to support amongst all of these devices. No longer just the 5 or 6 that we're used to, it is embedded operating systems, real-time operating systems, many different versions of Linux. Every single application that we see coming out for IoT is coming out with its own custom stack. So we've gone from supporting a very small estate with a limited number of devices to a huge number of devices, but more worryingly, many more combinations. Waiting. Try one more time. Now, the interesting thing is we've learned some lessons. As IT guys, we went through that first generation of Windows to Apple iOS to Samsung Galaxy tablets to Mac OS X. And we solved it through, the initiative was BYOD, and there were some things or some characteristics and lessons that we can learn from what we've done with BYOD. Number one, we couldn't stop it. So resistance was futile. If we tried to stop it as IT administrators, the users found a way around us. And the reason for that was that there was sufficient value for the user that they would get around our controls. So our policy was Windows only. They wanted to use iPhone. Our policy was corporate devices only, BlackBerry or Palm. They wanted to use Samsung. So there's enough, and typically executives are the people where this happened first. The other characteristics was these were devices that weren't provided by IT, which meant we had no control. And at least initially, we couldn't put agents on them. Now, this has changed a little bit. So if you go to a university or you bring your own device to your company, often your company will say, well, you must enroll to my MDM. You must have my certificate, and you must agree to a security policy before you come on board. So what's the similarity between BYOD and IoT? Well, actually, very much the same, but at a much bigger scale. Number one, you can't stop it. Resistance is futile. Business will find a way. And the reason is, this is much more valuable than just one user who wants to use an iPad or a tablet at work. There is core business value in using IoT to enable business process. And you as IT leaders are charged with representing this back to your company. How do we use technology to get more business value? You'll be doing that through the use of IoT. Again, these will not be provisioned by IT. They will be often acquired by the business, or they may be provided by a third party who's delivering a service as an outcome. Finally, you won't be able to manage these devices with agents, but more worryingly, you never, ever will. Now, just to talk about security for a second, an interesting data point here that I'll come back to in a minute. We spend a lot of time talking about advanced threats. Well, the reality is, if you've worked in IT security for a while, the vast majority of incidents that you see will be by exploits that are exploiting known vulnerabilities that we've known about for more than a year. The same is true of IoT. And the challenge that Gartner puts forward to us is that these things are very difficult to patch and they have very long lifespans. And so while we have this problem today, we're going to continue to have this problem for the next 5 to 10 years. So this is the question that I was going to say, I'm going to ask you and you won't know the answer to, most likely. So when we do our webinars, we do our own research, and we ask this question, because we've been doing IoT visibility and security for a couple of years now. We ask the question, how confident are you that you know all of the IoT devices on your network? And I'll change the question slightly. If you don't use IoT today or you don't think you do, how confident are you that you know all of the IT devices that are on your network? And what we see from our research is that 70%, almost 3/4, of organizations and the people that we speak to have some little or no confidence that they actually know what they have on their network. They have no visibility. Now, IT doesn't have any visibility. Who is motivated to get visibility? Yeah, the attackers are motivated to get visibility. Why? Reconnaissance is the first part of the very first stage of the attack cycle. So we have this set of devices out on our networks. We don't know how many there are, and we don't know quite what they are. we have very little confidence that we'll be able to find out what they are, but our attackers are motivated and equipped to go find that out for themselves. Now, is this really a problem? Well, with the distributed denial of service attacks, so those IP cameras that were taking down the web properties, it was the Mirai botnet, and the source code is available on GitHub. Mind you, GitHub got taken down when Dyn got taken down. The source code is available on GitHub. You can download it, you can compile it yourself, and you can begin running your own botnet. A researcher just recently asked the question, if I take an IP video camera and I connect it to the internet, how long does it take before Mirai finds it and begins to compromise it? Does anybody want to take a guess how long? Is it hours? Is it days? This research was done 5 weeks ago. Up it comes. 98 seconds for a vulnerable camera to be compromised by Mirai on the internet right this second. So this is a discussion about frameworks. So I wanted to give you some things to take away from here. This is the problem, okay? And the problem is real, and we see it in the wild today. There are 2 good references that I'm going to recommend that you read. For most of us that work in information security, there tend to be 2 frameworks that we follow, maybe 3. There'll be ISO 27001 and all of its derivatives. There will be the NIST standards, 800-53. And then there will be the Center for Internet Security security controls, the critical security controls, the CSCs. And the CIS released an IoT security companion to the critical security controls about a year ago. And what I've done here is taken one little thing from this, which tells us what's the difference between the devices that we manage today, the key differences, and the devices that we have to manage in an IoT world. And I'll highlight a couple of things, because you probably can't read it. So number 1, we have a general TCP/IP stack on Windows and Mac devices on PCs. In many IoT devices, we have a very fragile, limited TCP stack. It may be implementing TCP protocols or IP protocols in non-standard ways. Now that's good for us as a visibility company, because it lets us work out what those devices are. Unlike PCs that use commodity hardware and can be patched and upgraded, and tend to have a relatively short service life, IoT devices are using custom hardware with real-time operating systems that you may not have access to because they'll be locked down and hardened, and they stay in place for a long time. Probably most worryingly, and something interesting, because I've seen this during our proof of concepts with customers, traditional IT devices outside of the mainframe in the data center don't tend to run mission-critical applications. They're not a core part of the business. But if you're using IoT devices, so in a retail environment, this could be people counters. In a manufacturing environment, this is your SCADA or your manufacturing systems, your DCS or your PLC. These are running critical processes, either critical business processes, or in some cases, safety-related processes, and life as well if you think of healthcare. The act of doing active scans, so one visibility technique, do an active scan of your network every week, every month, every 6 months. But the problem with an active scan is that many of these IoT devices, when you look at them, they break. And so as you do an active scan, your people counter stops working. You certainly wouldn't do an active scan of medical devices. So you need a non-intrusive, passive way of identifying these. And then 2 interesting things here as well, which is in the IT world, anomalies are the norm. We get a lot of noise and events of IT systems. If you ever look through Event Viewer on your Windows system, you see a huge number of things. How do you know what's good and what's not? I don't know. That's why you use endpoint technology like Wildfire to help you take out all the noise and identify the things that go wrong. Well, in IoT, it's actually better than that because they're very limited languages. And so it's quite easy to see anomalies. And when anomalies happen, they tend to generate alerts at the head end in the distributed control system or in the medical control system. And as long as your IT visibility product can talk to those systems, then you get visibility too. So take a look at these 2 things. So the top one is the CSC IoT requirements. The bottom one is answering the question, how do you measure what's good and what's not? So if you're running an IT environment today, what does good look like? This, and I'll come to that in a minute, actually. I like to follow the money. Where do people spend money on IoT security? So Gartner has a figure here, which is about $350 million spent this year. And by 2018, it's growing very quickly. There'll be over $500 million spent on just IoT security, whatever that is. Of that $500 million, about half of it is going to be spent in discovery, provisioning, and authentication. So that's over here on the side. The other third will be spent on network segmentation and isolation. We call this C, we call this control, and I'll talk about the 17% at the end. So let's talk about C, or discovery. So what do I need to provide in my organization? I need to be able to answer the question, how many things do I have? How many PCs do I have? How many printers do I have? How many video surveillance cameras do I have? How many people counters? How many access points? How many light globes running Philips Hue with an embedded operating system are running on my network? Everything with an IP address, I need to know something about. So I discover it. Everything with an IP address I see. I then need to classify it. What is it? Is it a surveillance camera? Is it a light globe? Is it a PC? Once I've discovered it and I've classified it, I need to decide, is that something I expect to see on the network? Is it one of my cameras? Or is it something that a user has brought in from home? Simple stuff. Now, the challenge with IoT is we can't use agents. We have to do all of this classification agentlessly. Now, Forescout has been doing this since 2006. The only thing that's changed today is that suddenly there is a critical need for it, thanks to IoT. So with that in mind, what does good look like if you're in charge of IT security with regards to visibility? Or are there even any metrics or controls related to IT visibility, to asset visibility? Well, the answer is yes, absolutely. So what does good look like? And what I've done is picked a couple of the key measures along with their thresholds, or the metrics, from the CIS Critical Security Controls Measurement Guide, which was the second reference that I had there. So let me ask this question. So this isn't my question, by the way. This is something that an auditor might ask you. How many unauthorized devices are presently on the organization's network by business unit? It's a pretty straightforward question, and it's actually the very first question in the measurement guide. Well, let's forget about authorized versus unauthorized. Let's just ask the question, how many devices are presently connected to the organization's network? Now, in terms of the unauthorized bit, the metric is this. So we have, so what does good look like? The answer is, it depends. And it depends on you, your company, and your risk tolerance. So the way that the measurement guide works is it breaks the metrics down into a low, medium, and high risk threshold. So if you have a low threshold, as in you're very risk averse, with regards to the first question, it might be less than 1% of connected devices are unauthorized. If you have a high risk tolerance for this metric, as in it's not that important to you, it doesn't have a high business impact if there are unauthorized devices on the network, then your figure might be 10%. So I'm okay with 10% of my devices not being connected. And these questions are all the way through the guide. What percentage of this? How many of that? And as you go through, you come across what I call the denominator challenge, which is, okay, I have a moderate risk threshold for unauthorized devices. So good for me, a pass in the audit would be 1 to 4%. So the question really is, 1 to 4% of what? Do I know? So if I ask you now, how many of you comfortably could say that I know to within 1% certainty how many IP connected devices are in my environment today? Would anyone put up their hand? No, nobody? Okay. In my experience, 100% of people, 100% of customers that I ask this question to, and I mean 100%, not one has ever said anything other than, actually not 100% sure. So how can I have a metric in an audit that says 1% of a number that I don't know is a pass? And that is the essence of the visibility challenge. So Forescout has been doing agentless visibility for over 10 years. We help you answer this question by giving you the denominator. We'll tell you what your assets look like and how many there are. Well, now, once you know what you have, the next element around security is obviously control. And if we look at the Gartner side of things, they say about a third is being spent on network segmentation, isolation, and more. Now, the difficulty with IoT, we're back to the same problem that we had before, which is we can't use agents or policy on the device as a method of implementing control. So now we have to move to network-related control. And it needs to be it needs to be controlling networks. And what I mean by that is that in order for me to exercise some control, I need to be able to identify the device comprehensively, that's C, and then regardless of how that is connected, whether it's wired, wireless, Cisco, Juniper, HP, Samsung, with or without agent capability, I need to be able to do something about it. I need to be able to contain it. I need to be able to put it into an appropriate VLAN. I need to be able to exercise some control, and I need to be able to expose that control to other systems. And I'll show you an example of that in just a second. So just those two areas, visibility and control, is 75–80% of the spend in IoT security today. And in my experience, most of the focus has been on this. It's been on NAC. And I think we won't talk about competitors, but yes, NAC is a part of it, but NAC is not where you start. You start with visibility, and then you do control. Because if you do NAC first, you don't know how much you're missing. And then finally, there was a little 17% that was on other things, other than visibility and other than control. And in Forescout, we call this orchestration. This is the enhanced value. So this is where we bridge the gap between traditional IT systems and security solutions. So, for example, I'll give you two examples, actually. One, since we're at a PAN event, I'll talk about our integration with Palo Alto Networks with their firewalls. So what do I know? I know every IP address for every device on the network. And I know something about it, and I know who the user is, and I've got deep visibility into that device. What does Palo Alto Networks do? It does great application-level visibility and very rigorous perimeter policy. Why would I not bring those two things together? And we do. We provide Palo Alto Networks with context about the users that are coming onto the network using dynamic access groups and object ID. But in an IoT world, what would that look like? Oh, I'll give you two examples. And the key thing here really comes down to custom integrations, which is the visibility and control infrastructure that you look at must be able to talk to other things. So if I have an IP video surveillance system in my network, I will have what they call a VMS, a video management system. That video management system knows about every camera that's supposed to be on the network and whether it's up to date with patching or not. So when a camera comes up and connects to the network, my network visibility solution should talk to my video management system and say, I've just seen a camera come online. Is this an authorized camera? Is this something you have in your database? And it's running this, and is it running an approved version? Is it up to date with whatever firmware it's supposed to be running? And if not, I'll hold it in isolation, and if so, I'll put it into the IP video camera VLAN. That level of integration comes through a custom integration, and that's what we call orchestration, and that's the other 17% of the money that's being spent. So here's a use case in example. So a device connects to the network. Port goes green, and Counteract, which is Forescout software, detects that the device has been connected to the network through one of many different ways. Could be switch integration, could be DNS, could be AD, could be SPAN, lots of different ways to detect it. But the key thing is we detect the device, and we go through a classification, and we classify it as a printer. Now, a printer has all the characteristics of an IoT device. Embedded operating system, difficult to patch, typically in service for a long time. So we identify that it's a printer. Waity. And that's okay. But what we notice then, or perhaps not what we notice, but then that printer begins to communicate with a file server. Now that's not normal behavior for a printer. So it could have been something that it's either perhaps it's a printer that's been compromised, or perhaps it's someone impersonating to be a printer to start off with. Very common when you do MAC whitelist bypassing. But that compromised printer communicates with the corporate file server, and all of your other security technology is geared to detect that. So whether it's your ATD solution on the network, or whether it's your NetFlow sensor, but whatever, it goes up to the SIM, and the SIM does what a SIM does, in that it correlates events and it identifies that there's a problem. In most cases, that's where it stops. The SIM says, highly correlated threat, security operator, please take action. And then it sits there in a queue for a security operator to look at the SIM console and go, okay, what's my run book for that problem? So when the SIM detects an anomaly in Forescout world, the SIM tells Counteract, I have a high severity threat on this IP address. Please enact whatever policy is associated with high severity threats that have been sourced from the SIM. And then Counteract tells the network, block this device until we remediate. And at that point, the human gets involved. Because the key thing we're trying to do here is avoid responding to machine time threats in human time. We need to respond to machine time threats in machine time and then clean up with a human operator. The example I give here is for a printer. You could use exactly the same example for a security system, for SCADA, for industrial control. But the net of it is all of the components need to work together, but it starts with pervasive visibility as a core capability. Now, a couple of closing comments, because I want to give you some references. You don't have to believe me on this, by the way. If you look at, I've picked a couple of ones that I use quite a lot around the region. So I'm responsible for APJ, spend a lot of time talking to customers around in banking and finance and government in the different countries. And I was actually looking for one from Korea. Korea tends to fall back to NIST and the US standards as well. But if you look at any of the standards, whether you look at the ISO standard for auditing, NIST, the CIS CSCs that we just talked about, the ASD top 4, which if you're in security you'll know is very basic. Identify all your assets in terms of hardware, identify all your assets in terms of software, do patch management, and do application whitelisting. If you do those 4 things, you will negate 85% of breaches on a network. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority just recently released their cyber resilience assurance framework. That was a couple of months ago. MAS has their TRM in Singapore, and in Australia for the banks we have Report 429. All of them assume you know 100% what's on your network before you begin to ask any other questions. And in my experience, most of us don't. So my takeaway comments are a couple of things. So I break down all of our capabilities into 3 areas. See everything. Control, enable control for other applications as well as implement policy, and provide orchestration for third-party tools. And 4C, all measurements are only meaningful if you know the denominator. You need to know the total count of things before you can decide whether the percentage of things is accurate or not. And for control in an IoT world, you need to be looking at network segmentation and network-related controls. And hopefully with the example that I gave you before about how we orchestrate into video management systems or into third-party tools, that you will realize that you need to be thinking more broadly than just a single tool, but it's about how these tools work together that really provide the security that you need in a connected and IoT world. And with that, I'll pause and ask for questions. If I'm allowed to ask for questions, or if I'm not sure. No, I think we're okay. I do have a translator at the front. Nothing? Well, in that case, kamsahamnida. Thank you for your time.